Hey there, welcome to Noah's Narratives. Today, I've got a story that's as gripping as it is inspiring. Trust me, you'll want to hang on to every word, so don't go anywhere. Quick question before we jump in. Where are you watching from? Let me know your city and country in the comments below. It's amazing to see where this community is growing from around the world. If you're here for tales that touch the heart and spark the imagination, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with a fellow story lover, and subscribe so you'll never miss a new narrative. Alright, it's time to bring this story to life. Let's get started. Nestled in the heart of Maplewood, a quiet suburban town in the Midwest, a peculiar incident was about to unfold, the kind that would leave the town buzzing for years to come. It all began on a crisp December evening, just days before Christmas, when snow blanketed the earth in an almost poetic contrast to the warm glow emanating from the Thomas household on Elm Street. The Thomases were new to Maplewood, a family of 5 with smiles as wide as the open prairie skies. There was Greg Thomas, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose presence alone commanded respect, but his laugh, his laugh, was as warm and disarming as a hearth on a cold winter's night. Greg had recently been appointed the town's new police chief, a historic moment for Maplewood, though some residents weren't too keen on embracing history. Greg's wife, Leah, was a teacher with a gift for making everyone feel seen and heard. Their 3 kids, teenager Jasmine, a budding artist, 10-year-old Micah, who was constantly tinkering with gadgets, and 5-year-old Olivia, the family's giggling tornado, were excited to spend their first Christmas in a new town. But as the Thomases were setting up for a festive barbecue Christmas party in their backyard, trouble was brewing just a few houses down. In Maplewood, tradition ran deep. Christmas parties were supposed to mean wreaths, caroling, and potluck dinners in candlelit living rooms, not barbecue grills sizzling in the snow and Motown Christmas carols echoing down the block. To most of the neighborhood, this cultural twist was delightful, a chance to welcome something new. But to one resident, Mr. Howard Peterson, it was nothing short of an affront to Christmas itself. Howard Peterson had lived in Maplewood for 47 years, and in all that time, not much had changed. The streets were still lined with neat rows of modest homes, each adorned with white picket fences and the occasional garden gnome. Christmas was always a serene affair, soft carols on the radio, strings of white lights framing windows, and the faint smell of cookies wafting through the neighborhood. To Howard, this was the way things should be. And yet, here they were, newcomers shaking up the equilibrium. A barbecue Christmas party, of all things. He didn't know much about the Thomas family, except that they had moved in 3 months ago, bringing with them an energy Maplewood wasn't used to. Howard turned from the window, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable. Who grills in the snow? It's undignified." He settled back into his recliner, flipping through channels to find the quiet drone of his favorite news station. But the laughter outside continued. It wasn't just the Thomases now. Howard could hear other voices too, neighbors it seemed, who had joined in. He glared at the wall, as if his annoyance alone could will the noise to stop. Ethel, perched in her usual spot by the fireplace with her knitting, watched her husband with mild amusement. "You know," she said, looping another stitch, "you could just go over there and meet them. See what all the fuss is about." Howard snorted. "Why would I do that? Encouraging this circus? Absolutely not." The noise outside grew livelier as the night went on. Someone was singing, and not the soft crooning of Bing Crosby Howard was accustomed to. No! This was loud, soulful, and unapologetically joyful. He couldn't take it anymore. Rising with a huff, Howard shuffled back to the window and peeked out again. What he saw only deepened his irritation. There were twinkling string lights hung from the trees in the Thomas backyard, creating a warm glow against the snowy backdrop. A fire pit crackled near the center, surrounded by chairs where neighbors sipped hot cocoa and mulled cider. Children dashed about, tossing snowballs and giggling. And there was Greg Thomas, standing by the grill, flipping what Howard begrudgingly admitted looked like perfectly cooked ribs. But it was the music that irked him most, A smooth, jazzy rendition of Santa Claus is Coming to Town spilling from the speakers. Nothing like the solemn hymns Howard associated with the season. He stepped back from the window, muttering under his breath. It's like they've never even heard of Silent Night. At precisely 6:15 p.m., as Leah Thomas carried a tray of cornbread muffins outside, balancing them with the practiced ease of a mother who juggled far more chaotic tasks, Howard Peterson sat in his dimly lit living room, staring at his rotary phone. The muffled laughter and rhythmic beat of music from the Thomases' backyard grated against his nerves like nails on a chalkboard. He drummed his fingers on the phone's base, debating for a moment whether to make the call. Finally, he snatched up the receiver and punched the numbers with deliberate force, his face set in a grim expression of civic duty. When the dispatcher answered, Howard's voice was curt, clipped, and full of self-righteous indignation. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance on Elm Street," he announced, each word sharpened by annoyance. "A very loud party. It's out of control." The dispatcher paused, clearly unimpressed by the tone. "Sir, can you clarify? Is there an emergency?" Howard huffed, the sound of his exasperation practically radiating through the line. "It's ruining the neighborhood." The dispatcher, a seasoned professional named Carla, rolled her eyes as she clicked through her computer screen. She'd been working this job for 25 years and had handled everything from genuine emergencies to complaints about raccoons tipping over garbage cans. She knew exactly what this was, a nosy neighbor with too much time on his hands. Carla recognized the address immediately, Elm Street, specifically the house belonging to Chief Greg Thomas, her new boss. She'd attended his welcome ceremony just a few months earlier. The thought of sending officers to break up his family Christmas party made her stomach churn. Still, protocol was protocol. "I'll dispatch someone to check it out," she said tersely, already regretting it. As soon as the call ended, Carla turned to her partner, a rookie officer named Jacobs. "Guess who's about to walk into a storm?" she said, smirking as she handed him the address. Meanwhile, on Elm Street, the Thomases were in their element. The scent of barbecue ribs and roasted vegetables filled the air, mingling with the sweetness of Leah's cornbread muffins. Greg stood by the grill, tongs in one hand and a drink in the other, chatting with a group of neighbors who had stopped by after catching the music from down the street. Jasmine, their teenage daughter, was playing DJ, curating a playlist of holiday classics with a soulful twist. Micah and Olivia, their younger kids, were busy in a snowball fight with some neighborhood kids, their laughter punctuating the steady beat of music. Leah placed the muffins on a table near the fire pit, then turned to her husband. "Greg, did you invite half the block?" she teased, nodding toward the growing crowd. Greg laughed, flipping a rack of ribs. "Not exactly. I think the music did that for us." Unbeknownst to them, Howard was pacing back and forth in his living room, waiting for the cavalry to arrive. A little after 6:30 p.m., the flashing lights of a police cruiser lit up Elm Street, casting streaks of red and blue across the pristine snow. Howard practically leapt from his chair, peering out his window with a triumphant grin. "That'll teach them," he muttered, watching as the patrol car rolled to a stop in front of the Thomases' house. In the backyard, the arrival didn't go unnoticed. Conversations faltered, and heads turned toward the driveway. Leah's brow furrowed in confusion, while Greg calmly handed the tongs to a neighbor. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice steady. He walked through the side gate, his footsteps crunching on the snow, just as two officers stepped out of the patrol car. One of them, Officer Jacobs, looked visibly nervous. He adjusted his hat, glancing at the clipboard in his hand. Chief Thomas," he began, his voice faltering. Greg raised an eyebrow, folding his arms. "Yes, Officer Jacobs? What brings you here on Christmas Eve?" Jacobs stammered, suddenly regretting every career decision that had led him to this moment. "We, got a call about a disturbance." "Disturbance?" Greg repeated, his tone light, but with an edge of incredulity. Jacobs nodded, his face turning pink. A neighbor complained about noise. From his window, Howard watched the exchange, his initial glee turning into a pit of unease. He hadn't realized, how could he have known, that Greg Thomas wasn't just another newcomer. He was the Greg Thomas, the new police chief of Maplewood. Howard suddenly felt very small. He stepped back from the window, his chest tightening with a mix of guilt and embarrassment. Ethel, who had been watching him with a bemused expression, finally spoke. "Well, Howard, what are you going to do now?" "I didn't realize," he began, but his voice trailed off. Back in the driveway, Greg chuckled, patting Jacobs on the shoulder. "Don't worry, officer. Why don't you and your partner come join us? We've got plenty of food, and I promise we'll keep the music to a respectable level." Jacobs hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Chief." As the officers followed Greg into the backyard, the tension evaporated. Neighbors laughed and clapped as Greg explained the misunderstanding, making light of the situation. Soon, the music resumed and the party picked up right where it left off. 15 minutes later, as Greg handed out plates of ribs to a group of guests, a figure appeared at the gate. Greg looked up to see none other than Howard Peterson, standing awkwardly with a tin of cookies in his hands. "Mr. Peterson," Greg said warmly, walking over. "Come to join the fun?" Howard cleared his throat, his face flushed. I wanted to apologize. I may have been a bit hasty." Greg smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Apology accepted. Now, come on in. I hope you're hungry." To everyone's surprise, including his own, Howard joined the party. He sat by the fire pit, listening as Greg shared stories of his childhood Christmases, and even tapped his foot to a jazzy rendition of Jingle Bells. By the end of the night, Howard was laughing along with everyone else, the plate of barbecue ribs in his lap, a far cry from the cookie-cutter Christmas he'd envisioned. That snowy evening on Elm Street became the start of a new tradition, a blending of cultures, laughter, and good food that brought the community closer than ever. As for Howard, he learned that sometimes the best way to keep the peace is to join the party. And in the years to come, there wasn't a single Christmas where he didn't show up at the Thomases with his now famous plate of holiday cookies. Howard Peterson was not a man who easily admitted he was wrong. But after the Christmas barbecue fiasco and the warm welcome he received from the Thomas family, he began to see things differently. Slowly but surely, the walls of tradition and stubborn pride he'd built around himself started to crumble. And just when he thought his interaction with the Thomases couldn't get more significant, life threw him a curveball. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more stories that remind us of the power of community, forgiveness, and connection. A few months after that memorable Christmas Eve, Howard's son, Peter, called with exciting news. He and his fiancée, Lily, were getting married that summer, and they wanted the wedding to take place in Maplewood. The ceremony was to be held outdoors at a nearby park, and the reception would follow in the community hall. Peter had only one major concern. "Dad," he said over the phone, "we're expecting a big crowd, and some of Lily's family is flying in from all over the country. I want to make sure everyone feels safe. Do you know anyone who can handle security?" Howard's first instinct was to say no. Security? He'd never needed such a thing at a family event. But then he thought about it. How the world had changed, how large the guest list was, and most importantly, how much he wanted this day to be perfect for his son. For the first time, Howard thought of Greg Thomas. The next morning, Howard found himself standing on Greg's front porch, awkwardly clutching his hat. Leah answered the door with a bright smile. "Howard, what a surprise. Come on in." Greg appeared a moment later, still wearing an apron from what Howard guessed was another barbecue experiment. "Howard, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Howard cleared his throat. "Greg, I need your help. My son's getting married, and, well, he's asked for security at the wedding. I didn't know who else to turn to." Greg listened, nodding thoughtfully. "Howard, I'd be honored to help. Let me make a few calls." True to his word, Greg got to work. Within a week, He had arranged for a small team of off-duty officers to volunteer as security for the wedding. He even coordinated with the venue to ensure parking was smooth and no hiccups arose during the big day. But Greg and Leah didn't stop there. "Howard," Leah said when she called him one evening, "you can't host a wedding without good food. Let us cater the rehearsal dinner. Greg's already planning the menu." Howard hesitated, overwhelmed by their generosity. "I couldn't ask you to." "Nonsense," Leah interrupted. "It's what neighbors do." When the wedding day arrived, the Thomases were everywhere, working behind the scenes to make sure everything ran smoothly. Greg's security team blended seamlessly into the background, helping guests find their way and keeping an eye on things without disrupting the celebration. Leah and Jasmine had transformed the rehearsal dinner the night before into a feast that rivaled any five-star restaurant. Greg himself manned the grill, serving up a spread of ribs, brisket, and Leah's famous cornbread muffins that had the guests raving. The wedding was a resounding success. Guests danced late into the night, the air filled with laughter, music, and the scent of fresh flowers and good food. As the final guest departed, Howard found himself standing beside Greg, looking out over the empty reception hall. I don't know how to thank you, Greg," Howard said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just help with security. You made my son's wedding better than I could have imagined." Greg smiled, clapping a hand on Howard's shoulder. "That's what community is about, Howard. We lift each other up." From that day forward, the Petersons and Thomases weren't just neighbors. They were family. If you're enjoying this heartwarming story, don't forget to subscribe. Stories like these remind us of the importance of helping one another. Hit that button to stay inspired. Howard Peterson, the man who once called the cops on a Christmas party, learned a lesson that many of us often forget. Life isn't about holding on to traditions so tightly that we push others away. It's about opening our hearts, embracing change, and recognizing the value in our differences. The Thomases showed Howard that community isn't built on silence or sameness. It's built on shared laughter, good food, and mutual support. They taught him that real strength comes from leaning on others and offering a hand in return. As Howard reflected on the year's events, he couldn't help but smile. His son's wedding had been even livelier than that unforgettable Christmas party, and he owed it all to the family he once misunderstood. Let this story be a reminder to us all. Never underestimate the power of connection, kindness, and a good plate of barbecue. And if you want more stories like this, you know what to do. Subscribe, share, and join our growing community. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. The Thomases and the Petersons had come a long way since that snowy Christmas Eve barbecue, but the true test of their budding friendship came on a bright summer afternoon at Peter Peterson's wedding. While love and laughter filled the air, not everything went as planned. It was a day that would cement the bond between these two families forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable wedding day, hit that subscribe button and join our channel for more stories about connection, kindness, and the magic of community. Let's keep the inspiration going. Peter and Lily's wedding day started like a dream. The sun shone brightly. The park was transformed into a picturesque wonderland, and the scent of flowers mingled with the joyful chatter of arriving guests. Greg's security team, a small group of off-duty officers, moved quietly through the event, ensuring everything ran smoothly. No one noticed their presence, which was exactly how Greg planned it. He himself was keeping an eye on things while Leah and Jasmine helped serve guests during the cocktail hour. Howard, dressed in his finest suit, walked through the crowd with a newfound confidence. For the first time, he felt proud to have Greg and his family as part of this special day. But just as the reception began to hit its stride, an unexpected challenge arose. A group of uninvited guests, teenagers looking to crash the event, began causing a stir near the parking lot. They weren't violent, but their loud voices and rowdy behavior started to draw attention. Howard noticed first, his heart sinking. He imagined the disruption ruining Peter and Lily's special day. Panicking, he turned to Greg, who was already on the move. With calm authority, Greg approached the group, flanked by two of his officers. His presence was commanding, but his voice was kind. "Hey, folks, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. This is a private event." At first, the teens grumbled, but Greg's steady demeanor and respectful tone defused the situation. He even handed them directions to a nearby public park where they could hang out without bothering anyone. "Thanks for understanding," Greg said as the group dispersed. "Enjoy your evening." Within minutes, the disruption was a distant memory. The wedding continued uninterrupted, with most of the guests none the wiser. As the night wore on, the wedding became livelier than Howard had ever imagined. Guests packed the dance floor, laughing and twirling under strings of twinkling lights. The food, courtesy of Leah and Greg, became the talk of the night. Even Howard, who had once scoffed at barbecue ribs in December, found himself raving about Greg's secret sauce. Peter and Lily were radiant, their smiles brighter than the stars. And when Peter gave a heartfelt toast, he thanked Greg and Leah by name. "Your kindness made this day possible," he said, raising his glass. Howard, standing at the back of the crowd, wiped a tear from his eye. If this story is tugging at your heartstrings, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories like this. Tales that show how small acts of kindness can create big, lasting changes. Hit that button and stay inspired. The day after the wedding, Howard and Peter paid a visit to Greg's house. Howard carried a basket filled with Leah's favorite chocolates and a handwritten note of gratitude. When Greg answered the door, he found Howard looking uncharacteristically sheepish. "Greg," Howard began, "I don't have the words to properly thank you. What you did yesterday, handling that situation, keeping things smooth, it meant everything to me and my family." Peter stepped forward, shaking Greg's hand. "You gave us the wedding of our dreams, Chief Thomas. I don't know how we can repay you." Greg chuckled, waving them off. "You don't owe me anything. Just keep spreading the love. That's repayment enough." Leah appeared beaming. "And don't forget, we expect you at our next barbecue." As Howard and Peter left the Thomas home, Howard felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of true community. He realized that people like Greg and Leah weren't just neighbors. They were the heart of what made Maplewood special. So what's the lesson here? It's simple. Life is full of surprises, some of them challenging, some of them joyous. But when we learn to trust, rely on, and support the people around us, even the toughest moments can turn into opportunities for connection. Howard learned that no matter how different we may seem, kindness and generosity have a way of bridging divides. And Greg and Leah reminded us all that true leadership isn't about power, it's about service. Let this story inspire you to reach out to your own neighbors, offer a helping hand, and build bonds that last a lifetime. And if you love this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, share this video, and join a community that believes in the power of kindness. Thanks for watching.